No one has ever stepped inside another mind. Not a surgeon with the steadiest hand, not a scanner humming in a quiet hospital room, not a lover lying close enough to hear a heartbeat through skin. In all of human history, no instrument has ever measured the inside of someone else's experience. We have charted the deep ocean floor. We have photographed the rings of distant planets. We have traced the faint echo of a moment that happened billions of years ago. And still, the simplest thing remains hidden: whether the person sitting beside you is having any inner experience at all. It is a strange sentence to sit with, especially at night. It does not announce itself loudly. It arrives more like a draft beneath the door. The people you love, the strangers you pass, the voices on the other end of a phone call, you have always assumed something is happening behind their eyes. A whole world, perhaps, as vivid as your own. And yet, no proof has ever been offered. No proof can be. So tonight we will sit gently with this quiet suspicion, not to unsettle, but to wander through it slowly, as one might wander through an old library after closing time. If you find this kind of slow, thoughtful exploration soothing, you are welcome to stay a while, and perhaps return on other nights too. What follows is not an argument. It is a long, soft walk along the edge of a question that has never been answered and may never need to be. Settle for a moment into the feeling of being where you are, the texture of fabric somewhere against your skin, a faint sound in another room, the weight of your own head on the pillow or against the chair. All of it feels immediate, undeniable, present. The world is right here, pressing in, and yet, in a strange and quiet way, none of it is where you think it is. Everything you are perceiving right now is happening inside a small, dark, wet chamber of bone, your skull. The room you believe you are sitting in, the light you believe you are seeing, the voice you are hearing now, all of it is being assembled in real time, somewhere behind your forehead. Your brain has never once touched the outside world. It floats in darkness, in absolute silence, receiving only faint electrical whispers from your nerves. From those whispers, it builds the entire universe you experience. Some have compared this to a private theatre, a small inner stage where the world is performed nightly for an audience of one. But that comparison may be too generous, because in a theatre, at least the audience knows the show is staged. In our case, the illusion is so seamless, so deeply convincing, that we go an entire lifetime believing we are touching reality directly, when in fact we are watching a quiet, exquisite reconstruction. Modern neuroscience suggests that perception is not really a window. It is closer to a guess. The brain takes the trickle of signals it receives, light hitting the back of the eye, vibrations brushing the eardrum, pressure across the skin, and uses past experience to predict what is most likely out there. What you see is mostly memory and expectation, gently corrected by incoming data. This idea is sometimes called predictive processing, and although it sounds technical, the feeling of it is simple. You are not watching the world. You are watching your best guess at the world. Sit with that for a moment. The chair beneath you, the soft hum of the night, the shape of your own hand if you lift it into view. None of these arrive raw. They are filtered, interpreted, polished. By the time you experience them, they have already been processed by something that has never once stepped outside itself. And if this is true for you, it must also be true for everyone else. Each person walks through life inside their own private theatre, their own quiet, skull-bound universe, each one watching a show no other audience will ever see. Two people standing in the same room are not in the same room at all. They are in two separate inner versions of it, built independently, never overlapping, never fully shared. There is something tender about that thought, and something faintly haunting too. The closeness we feel to others, the sense that we are sharing a moment, is in some sense an act of trust, a quiet decision to believe their inner reconstruction resembles ours. This is where our long walk begins, not in suspicion of others, but in noticing, perhaps for the first time, how completely sealed each of us already is inside our own perception. The sealed window of the self is not a flaw, it is simply the architecture of being a mind. And from inside this architecture, The question of what exists beyond it becomes one of the gentlest, strangest mysteries any of us ever live with. There is a question so old and so quietly unsettling that many thinkers throughout history seem to step around it carefully, as if it were a sleeping animal best left undisturbed. They acknowledged it briefly, in footnotes, in stray remarks, in private letters. They rarely built whole philosophies around it. Some called it embarrassing, others called it a dead end. But it has never really gone away. It waits, patient and unsolvable, beneath nearly every serious question about the mind. The question is simple. How do you know anyone else exists? Not in the casual sense, of course there are bodies, voices, footsteps, messages. The question goes deeper. How do you know that behind those bodies and voices there is someone experiencing anything at all? How do you know the people in your life are not, in some unimaginable way, beautifully convincing surfaces with nothing behind them? You cannot check, you cannot peek inside, you cannot run a single test that would distinguish a person who genuinely feels from one who merely behaves as if they feel. In the 17th century, a French thinker named René Descartes sat in a quiet room and tried to find one single thing he could be absolutely certain of. He doubted his senses, because senses can deceive. He doubted his memories, because memories drift. He doubted even the world outside his window, and after stripping everything away, he found only one stubborn island of certainty. The fact that he was doubting meant that something was doing the doubting. There had to be a thinker behind the thought. From this, he produced the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." It is often quoted as a triumph, but notice what it actually proves. It proves only that you exist. It says nothing about anyone else. Descartes secured a single mind, his own, and left everyone else dangling in uncertainty. He tried to argue his way back to a shared world, but those later steps have never been as convincing as the first. The starting point quietly outshone everything that followed. This question, the impossibility of proving other minds, came to be called the problem of solipsism, and most philosophers treated it the way one treats a strange knock in an old house. They acknowledged it, then politely changed the subject. It is not that they thought it was unimportant, it is more that they could not find a way through it. No argument has ever closed the gap. No logical move has ever bridged the silence between one consciousness and another. What is remarkable is how rarely this troubles anyone in daily life. You wake up, you speak to family, you smile at strangers, and you never once stop to wonder whether they have inner lives. The assumption is so natural, so automatic, that questioning it almost feels rude. And yet, the moment you do question it, you realize the assumption is entirely an act of trust. It is not based on evidence, it is based on the gentle, almost instinctive sense that other people are like you. Some have wondered whether this assumption is the quiet foundation of every other belief we hold. Without it, language loses its point, love loses its object, morality loses its weight. We never argue for the existence of other minds, because we cannot live without already believing in them, and so the question stays where it has always stayed, half-asked, half asleep, whispered between thinkers across centuries. Consider, for a moment, what happens when you look at something as ordinary as a candle flame across a room. The experience feels instant. You open your eyes. The flame is there, warm and golden, flickering softly. There seems to be nothing between you and it. But between you and that small bright shape lies one of the longest and strangest translations in nature. A photon leaves the flame. It travels through the air, a tiny ripple of light moving at the only speed the universe truly allows. It crosses the room in a fraction of a heartbeat and enters your eye through the lens, which bends it gently onto a curved surface at the back called the retina. There, the photon ends its journey as a particle of light. It is absorbed by a cell, and from this moment on, the flame you are about to see no longer exists as light at all. What happens next is extraordinary. The cell that absorbed the photon changes shape ever so slightly. That tiny change triggers a chemical cascade, which alters the cell's electrical state, which sends a small pulse along a nerve. That pulse joins thousands of others, all racing along the optic nerve toward deep regions of the brain. By the time the signal reaches the visual cortex at the back of your head, the original photon is long gone. The flame, in any direct sense, has not entered you. Only a pattern of electrical activity has, and yet, from that pattern, the brain constructs the candle. It reassembles colour, shape, brightness, depth, even the faint sense of warmth that seems to come from looking at fire. It does this so quickly and so smoothly that you never notice the translation happening. The flame appears in your awareness as though it had been there all along, waiting for you to notice it. Some have described seeing as a kind of dreaming with input. The brain dreams the world, and the senses keep the dream tethered to reality. Without the senses, the dream would drift freely. Without the brain's interpretation, the senses would deliver nothing more than meaningless static. The flame you see is neither pure light nor pure imagination. It is something woven from both, a quiet collaboration between the world and the mind that perceives it. This long translation has a strange implication. The flame you see is not the flame across the room. It is the brain's version of that flame, constructed from indirect clues. The real flame remains forever just out of reach, hidden behind the very process that allows you to know it exists. You are always one step removed from everything you perceive, including the people you love most. If your own seeing is this layered, this filtered, this reconstructed, then every other person's seeing must also be a private construction, assembled from their own nerves and their own quiet inner workshop. Two people watching the same candle are watching two different candles, each built inside two different skulls, each shaped by two different lifetimes of memory and expectation. There is something quietly humbling about this. The world we share is, in a sense, a shared assumption, a gentle agreement between separate inner constructions that they are pointing at the same thing. The flame flickers across the room. Inside your skull, a small private flame flickers in response. And somewhere, in someone else's skull, perhaps another small flame is flickering too. Imagine a ripe apple resting on a wooden table. Sunlight pools across its skin, and you would describe its color without hesitation as red. Anyone in the room with you would say the same. The word arrives easily, almost automatically. Red, a simple, agreed-upon name for a simple, agreed-upon color. But here is something strange to consider, gently, in the quiet of the night. You have no way of knowing what red looks like inside anyone else's mind. You have learned the word together. You have pointed at the same fire trucks, the same roses, the same warning signs. You have agreed since childhood that those things are red. But the inner experience, the actual sensation of redness as it appears in someone else's awareness, that has never been compared. It cannot be compared. There is no instrument fine enough, no language precise enough to lift the color out of one mind and place it beside the color in another. Philosophers have long played with a soft thought experiment about this. Suppose that, somehow, the color you experience as red is exactly what another person experiences as green. When they look at an apple, they see what you would call green, but they have always been taught to call it red. When they look at grass, they see what you would call red, but they have always been taught to call it green. Both of you all your lives would point at the same objects, use the same words, and never disagree about anything. The inner colors could be entirely swapped, and the outer behavior would remain identical. No conversation could ever reveal the difference. This is sometimes called the inverted spectrum, and although it sounds like a puzzle, it is more like a gentle door opening onto a deeper room. The room contains what some thinkers have called qualia, the raw, private feel of an experience, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the sweetness of honey. These are the textures of consciousness, and they belong entirely to the one who has them. What is fascinating is that science has learned a great deal about color without ever touching this inner mystery. We know that certain wavelengths of light strike the retina. We know which cells respond to which wavelengths. We know how those signals travel and where they are processed. We can describe color in physics, in chemistry, in neuroscience. And yet none of that tells us why red feels the way it does, or whether your red and another person's red are the same. There is something quietly beautiful about this. Each person walking through the world carries their own private palette, their own inner color scheme, never quite shared, never quite verified. The sunset you watched last week may have looked nothing like the sunset your friend watched beside you. Both of you sighed at the same moment. Both of you said it was beautiful, and both of you may have been seeing, in some unimaginable inner sense, entirely different paintings, and yet you stood there together. You agreed it was beautiful, and in some way, that agreement was enough. The hidden color behind every word is one of the softest mysteries of being a mind. It is not a problem to be solved. It is more like a quiet companion, walking beside every conversation we have ever had, listening as we trade names for experiences we will never fully share. Picture a face you love, not in detail, just the impression of it, the way the eyes soften when they recognize you, the small upward shift at the corners of the mouth, the way the whole face seems to brighten in a way no camera quite captures. Without thinking, you know what that face means. You feel its warmth before you ever name it. It happens so quickly, so naturally, that it seems impossible the warmth could be anything other than directly transmitted, mind to mind. But this too is a quiet construction. You are not actually receiving warmth. You are reading patterns. The brain has a remarkable specialty for faces. Entire regions, particularly in a fold of tissue called the fusiform area, that activate almost exclusively when a face appears. From infancy, this circuitry is tuned to find faces everywhere. In clouds, in wood grain, in the front of a car. 2 dots and a curve are sometimes enough. The brain is so eager to see faces that it would rather invent them than miss them. And once a face is detected, another layer activates, the subtle reading of emotion. The slight tightening around the eyes, the flare of the nostrils, the way the lower lip lifts or falls. These tiny movements are absorbed almost instantly, often below conscious awareness, and the brain produces an interpretation: happy, sad, worried, affectionate. We rarely notice the interpretation happening. We simply feel that we know what the other person is feeling. For a long time, scientists studying monkeys noticed something curious. Certain cells in the brain fired both when the monkey performed an action and when it watched another creature perform the same action. These came to be called mirror neurons, and although the full picture in humans is still being studied and gently debated, the basic idea has shaped how we think about empathy. When you watch someone wince in pain, parts of your own pain processing regions quietly stir. When you watch someone laugh, your own laughter circuits warm faintly in response. The brain seems to simulate the experience of others, using its own machinery as a kind of inner mimicry. This is a remarkable design. It allows you to feel, in a faint inner echo, what another person might be feeling. But notice what it really is. It is not direct access. It is not telepathy. It is your own brain producing a small internal version of what it guesses is happening inside someone else. Their joy is not actually entering you. Your brain is generating its own quiet joy in response to the signs it reads on their face. In other words, the warmth you feel from someone you love is, in part, warmth you are generating yourself in response to clues you have learned to read over years of closeness. The empathy is real, the connection is real, but the bridge is built from your side, not theirs. There is something tender in this. Every act of understanding another person is, in some sense, an act of inner imitation. You become a soft mirror for them, and they become a soft mirror for you, and between you 2 private simulations dance gently, never quite touching, but moving so closely in rhythm that it feels like one shared experience. We have evolved, beautifully, to assume that the warmth across the table is real. Perhaps it is, perhaps it always will be. But the bridge is built from inference, not certainty, and still, somehow the bridge holds. Think about the last real conversation you had. Maybe it was earlier today, maybe long ago. 2 people sitting across from each other, or speaking through a small glowing screen, exchanging words. It felt, in the moment, like a meeting, like something passed between you, like your thoughts and theirs briefly touched. But if you look closely at what actually happened, Conversation is one of the strangest and most fragile things we do. A thought forms inside one mind. It begins as something wordless, a feeling, an image, an impulse. Then the mind reaches for language and tries to wrap that wordless thing in symbols. Words are chosen, arranged, softened, sharpened. The mouth shapes them into sound, or the fingers shape them into text. The sound travels through air, vibrating tiny bones in another person's ear. Those vibrations become electrical signals. Those signals are decoded into words. Those words are then unwrapped, slowly and imperfectly, back into something the listener hopes resembles the original wordless thing. At every step, something is lost. The thought you had was richer than the words you found for it. The words you spoke were richer than the sounds the other person heard. The sounds they heard were filtered through their own memories, their own associations, their own tired or alert state of mind. By the time your thought arrives inside their head, it has been translated, compressed, decompressed, and reinterpreted. What lands inside them is not exactly what left you. It cannot be. Linguists and philosophers have sometimes described language as a kind of long, patient negotiation. We do not transmit meaning directly. We send signals, and we hope the listener does their best to reconstruct what we meant, using context, tone, expression, history. Most of the time, the reconstruction is close enough that we feel understood. Occasionally, it goes wrong, and we are surprised by what the other person took from our words. Even more rarely, we notice how much we always rely on the assumption that they got it right. This gap between meaning intended and meaning received is sometimes called the inferential distance. It is the soft silence inside every conversation, the small space that no sentence can quite cross. You speak and you trust. They listen and they guess. Between the two of you lies a quiet, invisible distance that language reaches toward but never fully closes, and yet conversation feels so seamless. Two old friends can finish each other's sentences. A parent can understand a child's mumbled word in a crowded room. Lovers can communicate in glances. This is not because the gap has closed. It is because, over time, both minds have built such a detailed model of the other that the guessing has become remarkably accurate. We do not transmit thoughts, we become good at predicting them. Some have wondered if every conversation is, in some quiet sense, a duet of two solitudes, each speaker alone inside their own perception, sending small parcels of language across an empty space, hoping the other will unwrap them gently. When it works, it feels like communion. When it fails, the silence between two minds becomes audible. Tonight, perhaps, the silence does not need to feel lonely. It can be heard instead as something tender, the quiet distance every conversation has always crossed, and the small daily miracle of how often, somehow, we manage to be understood at all. When a small child first realizes that other people have thoughts of their own, something quietly extraordinary happens. Up until a certain age, very young children seem to assume that what they know, everyone knows. If they see a cookie hidden in a drawer, they assume everyone else has also seen it. Their inner world and the outer world feel like the same thing. Then, sometime around the age of 4, a soft door opens in the mind. They begin to understand that other people can hold information different from their own, that other people can be mistaken, that other minds separate from theirs exist. Psychologists have studied this transition for decades, often using a simple test. A child watches as a doll places a marble in a basket and then leaves the room. While the doll is away, another doll moves the marble to a box. The child is then asked where the first doll will look for the marble when it returns. Younger children say the box because they themselves know the marble is in the box. Older children say the basket because they understand that the doll does not know what they know. That small shift from one answer to the other marks the awakening of what researchers call theory of mind, the ability to imagine the mental states of others. Notice what this means. Even our most basic sense of other people is not direct perception. It is theory. It is a model the mind builds. We do not see other minds. We infer them. the way a detective infers a suspect from footprints. Every interaction you have ever had has been guided by this quiet inner detective, constantly reading clues, words, expressions, pauses, gestures, and constructing a guess about what someone else is thinking, wanting, feeling. For most of us, this happens so smoothly that it feels like seeing. We say, "She's upset," with the same confidence we say, "The sky is blue." But the upset is never directly observed. It is reconstructed from a face, a tone, a posture. The blue, as we have already wandered through, is itself a reconstruction. Behind every social moment lies an enormous amount of invisible inference, performed by your brain so quickly and so reliably that you mistake the inference for direct knowledge. There is something beautiful about how well this system works. Humans are extraordinary readers of one another. We can sometimes detect a friend's mood from a single text message. From the choice of one word over another, we can read sarcasm, hidden grief, gentle affection, brewing irritation, all from subtle signals most of us could not consciously describe. The system is so good that we rarely notice it is a system at all, but the system is also a kind of veil. It allows us to function as social beings, to love, to cooperate, to grieve together. It does not, however, give us proof. It gives us patterns, and patterns, however reliable, are not the same as direct access. A skilled actor can fool the system. A grieving friend can hide their pain. A stranger can wear an expression that means something entirely different in their own inner language. Each of us walks through life as a quiet theorist, building working models of the people around us, trusting those models because, most of the time, they are all we have. There is a famous question that a quiet, brilliant mathematician posed in the middle of the 20th century. His name was Alan Turing, and he was thinking in his careful way about machines. He wanted to know whether a machine could ever truly think, but he understood even then that thinking is invisible. You cannot point to a thought. You cannot weigh one. So instead of asking whether a machine could think, he asked a softer question. Could a machine behave in such a way that you could not tell it apart from a person? He imagined a simple test. A human sits in one room, typing messages back and forth with two unseen partners. One partner is another human, the other is a machine. The judge does not know which is which. If, after a long conversation, the judge cannot reliably tell which is the person and which is the machine, then in some meaningful sense the machine has passed. This became known as the Turing test, and it has shaped how we think about artificial minds ever since. What is gentle and strange about Turing's idea is that he was not really claiming the machine had an inner life. He was simply pointing out that, from the outside, you cannot distinguish a being with an inner life from one without. Behavior, no matter how rich, cannot prove experience. A perfect impersonation is indistinguishable from the real thing, by definition. Now turn the mirror around. The Turing test was designed to ask whether machines could seem like minds, but the same test, applied to anyone you have ever met, would reveal something quietly humbling. You have never had any other kind of evidence about other people. You have only ever had their behavior, their words, their faces, their gestures. You have always been, in a sense, the judge in a Turing test that never ends, and the people in your life have always passed it, not because you have verified their inner experience, but because they behave in ways consistent with having one. Some have wondered what this means for our relationship with the world. If behavior is all we ever get, then the line between a mind and a very good imitation of a mind becomes philosophically thin. Of course, in practical life, no one seriously believes their family is a collection of imitations. The brain is wired to assume inner life behind familiar faces. But the strict logical question remains. Behavior is the only evidence we ever have for anyone. In recent years, this question has become more than philosophical. Computer systems can now generate language that often feels remarkably human. They can hold conversations, write poems, offer comfort, answer questions in tones that seem warm. They do not, by all current understanding, have inner experience. They are, in a sense, extraordinarily skilled mirrors. But they have forced us to revisit Turing's quiet point. If behavior is the standard, The standard is not as solid as we thought. For tonight, this is not a worry. It is a gentle reminder. Every relationship in your life rests on the same foundation. The assumption that what behaves like a mind is a mind. It is an assumption almost everyone shares, and it is one of the kindest assumptions we have ever made. Without it, the world would empty out. With it, the world fills, even if we can never quite prove the filling is real. There is a thought experiment that drifts through philosophy of mind like a strange dream. It is sometimes called the philosophical zombie, although the name is a little dramatic for what is actually a very quiet idea. A philosophical zombie is not a creature from a film. It is something stranger and softer than that. It is a being that looks exactly like a person, behaves exactly like a person, speaks exactly like a person, and yet has no inner experience at all. The lights, so to speak, are off. There is no one home. And yet, from the outside, nothing seems unusual. Imagine such a being. They wake up in the morning and stretch. They sip coffee and comment on its warmth. They laugh at jokes, frown at sad news, hug their loved ones, and say goodnight. Their brain functions in every measurable way like a normal human brain. Neurons fire, hormones shift, words are produced. But inside, where you and I have a private, glowing world of experience, this being has nothing. No felt sensations, no inner sense of being, just behavior, all the way through, with no one experiencing it. The question philosophers ask is not whether such beings exist. Almost no one thinks they do. The question is whether such beings are even conceivable. And many thinkers believe that they are. If you can imagine a being physically identical to a human but lacking inner experience, then experience is not the same thing as physical behavior. There is something extra happening in real people, something that cannot be reduced to nerves and chemicals alone. This is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems are how the brain processes information, how it controls the body, how it forms memories. Those are difficult, but in principle they are solvable. The hard problem is why any of this should feel like anything from the inside. Why is there a warmth to warmth? Why is there a redness to red? Why is there something it is like to be you? No one knows. Honestly, no one knows. There are theories, gentle, careful, partial theories. But the gap between describing brain activity and explaining inner experience remains wide. Some thinkers believe science will eventually cross it. Others believe the gap is, in some deep sense, uncrossable. Still others suspect that consciousness may be more fundamental than we have realized, woven somehow into the fabric of things in ways we have not yet learnt to ask about. What is gentle about the zombie thought is that it does not require believing anyone is a zombie. It only requires noticing that you cannot prove they are not. The same uncertainty that makes the inverted spectrum possible makes the zombie possible too. From the outside, a person with rich inner life and a person with no inner life would look identical. We assume the rich inner life because we have one ourselves, and because it would be strange to imagine being surrounded by emptiness wearing familiar faces. Some have found this thought disturbing. Others have found it freeing. If inner experience cannot be proven from the outside, then it must be one of the most private and precious things in existence. It belongs to the one who has it, and to no one else. It is not the kind of thing that needs to be defended. It only needs to be lived. Hold the thought softly and let it drift. Step out, for a moment, beyond the human. Imagine a cat curled in a patch of sunlight, eyes half closed, tail occasionally flicking. Imagine a dog dreaming, legs twitching gently in sleep. Imagine a bird tilting its head to study a leaf. We assume, without much thought, that something is happening inside them. Not the same as our experience, perhaps, but something, a small inner world, a faint awareness, a sense of being. But how do we know? We cannot ask them. We cannot scan their inner experience. We rely, once again, on behavior and on a kind of analogy. Their bodies share much with ours. Their brains, though smaller, are built from the same kinds of cells. Their nervous systems run on the same chemistry, so we extend our assumption outward. If we feel things from a brain like ours, Perhaps they feel things from a brain like theirs. The further we go from humans, the harder this analogy becomes. Consider the octopus. An octopus has a brain in its head, but it also has clusters of neurons distributed throughout its arms. 2/3 of its neurons live outside the central brain, in the arms themselves. Each arm can taste, touch, and react to its environment with a remarkable degree of independence. Scientists who study octopuses have wondered very seriously what it might be like to be one. Is the experience centralized, like ours, with a single inner observer? Or is it distributed, with each arm having its own quiet flicker of awareness, all of it coordinated, somehow, into a single creature? We do not know. The architecture is so different from our own that even our best guesses feel like guesses. An octopus can solve puzzles, recognize individuals, change color in response to mood, and seemingly play. By many of our usual signs, it appears to have inner life, but the shape of that life, if it exists, may not resemble anything humans can easily imagine. This stretches the question of other minds in a beautiful way. The problem is not only about proving inner experience in beings similar to us, it is about wondering what forms inner experience might take in beings unlike us. Some philosophers and scientists have suggested that consciousness, whatever it is, may come in many shapes. There may be flickers of experience in places we have not thought to look, or there may be none in places we have always assumed it lives. A bee returning to her hive, dancing to communicate the direction of flowers, performs something extraordinary. We have learned to translate the dance, but we do not know whether the bee feels anything as she performs it. A tree, slow as it is, exchanges chemical signals with neighboring trees through underground fungal networks. Is there any inner spark to that exchange, or is it pure mechanism? We cannot say. What is quietly stunning is that we share a planet with countless other forms of life, and each one may carry, or may not carry, its own version of being. We have only ever known one form of consciousness intimately, our own, and even that we barely understand. Tonight, the family of minds may be larger than we usually imagine, or it may be smaller. Either way, when you next see a creature pause and look up at the sky, you might find yourself wondering what, if anything, the sky looks like from inside that small, distant cousin of awareness. Modern science has built remarkable instruments for looking inside the living brain. Machines that hum quietly while a person lies still, sliding images of brain activity to nearby screens. Functional MRI scanners can show which regions of the brain become more active when a person looks at a face, listens to music, recalls a memory, or feels fear. Electrodes finer than a hair can detect the firing of individual cells. We can map circuits, trace pathways, and watch thoughts ripple, in a manner of speaking, across the surface of the cortex. It is one of the most beautiful achievements of our time, and yet, despite all this looking, no instrument has ever found a single experience. No scanner has ever recorded a feeling. No image has ever captured the redness of red, or the sadness of sadness, or the quiet sense of being that fills your inner world right now. What scanners record is correlated activity. When you see a face, certain regions light up. When you feel afraid, others do. We can sometimes predict, with growing accuracy, what kind of thought or perception someone is having based on patterns of activity. This is called identifying the neural correlates of consciousness. But correlation is not the same as explanation. We know that certain brain activity accompanies certain experiences. We do not know why. Imagine watching a television from outside the building. You can see the lights flickering through the window, the colors changing, the rhythm of movement. From those clues, you might guess what kind of show is playing. A comedy might have quick, bright shifts. A drama might have slow, deeper tones. Over time, your guesses could get quite accurate, but you would never be inside the show. You would never know what the characters were saying. You would only ever know the patterns of the light on the wall. Brain scanners are a little like this. They show us the lights on the wall of consciousness, not the experience itself. Even the most detailed map of brain activity does not tell us what it feels like, from the inside, to have that activity. There is something happening in the brain when you taste honey. We can show which regions are involved. We can describe the chemistry, but the sweetness itself, that small private burst of pleasant flavor, never appears on any screen. It belongs to the one who tastes. This gap between what science can measure and what consciousness actually is has been called the explanatory gap. Many thinkers believe it is the central mystery of the mind. Some hope that future tools, future theories, future frameworks we have not yet imagined will close the gap. Others suspect that no measurement could ever reach what experience is, because experience is not the kind of thing that can be measured from the outside. There is a quiet humility in this. Science has been so successful at so many things that we sometimes expect it to solve everything. But here, gently, it bows. The brain shows itself, the mind does not. The scanner records what can be recorded and politely declines to deliver the rest. For tonight, this is not a failure. It is a reminder of how strange the world is. The most familiar thing in your existence, your own inner experience, is also the thing science has had the hardest time describing. It is hidden in plain sight, intimate and unmeasured, present in every moment and absent from every instrument. Long before philosophers ever asked whether other minds exist, humans were already living as though they did. Long before written language, long before formal logic, long before anyone sat in a quiet room and wondered what could be proven, our ancestors were holding their children, signaling to companions across grasslands, sharing food, mourning the dead. The assumption that other people have inner worlds is older than philosophy. It is older than civilization. It is in some sense older than thinking itself. Evolutionary biologists who study social behavior often point out that our brains are deeply, profoundly tuned for one another. A newborn infant only hours old will preferentially look at faces over other patterns. Infants follow the gaze of caregivers. They mirror expressions. They cry when they hear other infants cry. None of this is taught. It is built in, written somewhere in the architecture of the species, refined over many thousands of generations. This makes sense when you think about it. Humans are not the strongest creatures on the planet. We are not the fastest. We do not have claws or thick fur or sharp teeth. What we have instead is one another. Our survival has always depended on cooperation, on coordination, on the ability to model what another person might be thinking, feeling, planning, needing. The ones who could not read other minds well were less likely to survive. The ones who could thrived. The result is a species so finely attuned to inner life in others that we sometimes see it where it is not, in the moon's face, in the swaying of trees, in the eyes of a stuffed toy a child names and loves. This deep attunement is a kind of older language, spoken not in words but in glances, in tone of voice, in the timing of touch. It exists below philosophy, below proof, below argument. By the time anyone is old enough to wonder whether other people are real, they have already spent years assuming it, building it into their very sense of the world. The question of other minds comes very late to a mind that has been steeped in other minds from its first breath. Some have wondered if this is why the problem of other minds, while logically unsolved, is emotionally untroubling for most people. We feel the existence of others before we ever try to prove it. The feeling is older, deeper, more certain than any argument. To disbelieve in other minds would be to disbelieve in something the body itself has known since before memory. The heart, in some quiet sense, accepts what the mind cannot prove. There is something beautiful about this layered design. Logic and feeling can sit together, not in conflict, but in gentle balance. The logician says, I cannot prove anyone else is real. The body says, and yet I have always known. Both can be true. Neither has to win. Trust, in this sense, is not a leap. It is not a risk. It is simply the older language, still speaking through every relationship you have ever had. When you smile at someone, when you grieve for a stranger you have never met, when you feel moved by a story about a life lived long ago, you are speaking that language. Philosophy may never close the gap, but the older language has been quietly crossing it, generation after generation, since long before the question was ever asked. Last night, or some night not long ago, you almost certainly dreamed. You may not remember it. Most dreams slip away within moments of waking, as gently as steam from a cup, but while it was happening, the dream felt entirely real. There were people in it. They had faces, voices, opinions. They responded to you. They made you laugh, or worry, or feel loved. And in the moment, you did not doubt them for an instant. This is one of the strangest and most easily overlooked facts about being a mind. Every night, your brain effortlessly produces convincing other people who do not exist. They are not real in any external sense. They have no bodies outside your skull. They are not anywhere in the world. They are constructions woven from memory, expectation, and the quiet improvisational genius of a sleeping brain. And yet, while you are inside the dream, they are as solid and as real as anyone you have ever met. Sleep researchers have studied this for decades. During a stage called REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement, the brain becomes remarkably active. In some ways, it is almost as active as it is during waking life. The regions involved in emotion, in visual imagery, in social processing, all hum with activity. Meanwhile, the regions responsible for logical evaluation and the sense of strangeness are turned down. This is why you can have a dream in which your old school teacher is also a giraffe, and you do not find anything odd about it. The part of your brain that would normally raise an eyebrow is, gently, asleep. What this means is that the brain has the full capacity, every single night, to fabricate other minds. It writes their dialogue. It animates their faces. It gives them desires, secrets, and reactions. From your perspective inside the dream, these characters are not your inventions. They feel separate, autonomous, surprising. They sometimes say things you would not have predicted. They sometimes seem to know things you forgot. And yet, every single word they speak comes from inside your own head. Sit with that for a moment. Every night you experience a small private world full of seemingly independent beings, all of whom are entirely you. They feel like others. They feel like proof of others, and they are not. This raises a soft, careful question. If your brain can produce convincing other minds while you are dreaming, what exactly is the difference between those dream people and the waking ones? The dream people are clearly inside your head, but the waking ones, as we have wandered through, are also represented inside your head. Your perception of your loved ones is itself a brain construction, assembled from sensory clues. When you see your friend across a table, what you are actually experiencing is not the friend, but a model of the friend inside your own mind. Of course, the model in waking life corresponds to a real person outside. The model in dreams does not. That difference is important, but the experience itself, the felt sense of another mind being there, is produced by the same kind of machinery in both cases. The brain is equally good at populating its inner world either way. For tonight, this is not unsettling. It is simply a reminder of how much of our experience of others is, and has always been, an inner production. There are quieter, stranger places between sleeping and waking, where the brain does something fascinating. It conjures people, not in dreams exactly, but in the soft borders around them. And sometimes, even in full waking life, it does it too. These experiences are more common than most of us realize, and they offer a gentle window into how delicately our sense of others is constructed. Many people, just as they are drifting off to sleep, experience what is called hypnagogia. In this drifting state, faces sometimes appear and dissolve, voices murmur softly, saying a single word or a half sentence. Sometimes there is a sense of someone standing nearby, although no one is there. These experiences are not signs of illness. They are part of the normal, harmless landscape of the falling asleep mind. When the boundaries between perception and imagination grow thin, there is also a condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome, which occurs in some people who have lost much of their vision. Their eyes can no longer send strong signals to the brain. The brain, accustomed to receiving rich visual data, begins to fill in the silence with vivid scenes. People with this condition sometimes report seeing crowds of small figures, Intricate patterns, animals, or unfamiliar faces. The figures are clearly not there. The person usually knows the figures are not there, and yet the brain, in its quiet way, continues to produce them. Researchers have also studied something called the feeling of presence. In certain conditions, including some neurological events and even prolonged isolation, people report a clear, undeniable sense that someone is standing just behind them or beside them. There is no visual figure, no sound, but the felt sense of another mind nearby is so strong that some climbers, alone on long expeditions, have described conversations with a presence that no one else could see. Bereavement, too, often produces these experiences. Many people, after the death of a loved one, sense the loved one nearby. They may hear their voice for an instant. They may catch a glimpse of them out of the corner of an eye. In most cultures, these experiences are quietly common and are not signs of confusion. They appear to be the brain's way of holding on to a model that was central to its inner world for years. What is gentle and remarkable about all of this is what it suggests. The sense of another mind being present is, at least in part, generated inside us. Under normal conditions, our brains generate that sense in response to real external people. But under unusual conditions, the same sense can arise without anyone being there. The mechanism is the same, the trigger is different. Some have wondered what this means about ordinary social experience. If the felt sense of another presence can be conjured without input, then the felt sense of presence we have around real people is not pure perception, it is part perception, part construction, part habit. The brain knows how to manufacture the experience of being with someone. It does so flawlessly in dreams, vividly in certain conditions, and constantly in waking life. This is not a reason to distrust your sense of others. The mechanisms work very well most of the time. It is instead a reason to feel softly amazed at how rich the inner world is. Companionship, in some quiet sense, is partly built inside us. Even when we are alone, the architecture for company remains, waiting, occasionally lighting up on its own, as if reminding us that we are never quite as solitary as we feel. There is a thought that has drifted around philosophy and physics for a long time, sometimes in serious lectures and sometimes in late-night conversations between friends. It is the idea that what we call reality might be a kind of simulation run on some vastly more complex system, and that everything we experience, including other people, might be patterns within that system rather than independent existences. The idea is not new. Long before computers, thinkers wondered whether the world might be a dream, an illusion, a shadow cast by something deeper. The modern version simply uses the language of computation. It is important to hold this gently. Some physicists and philosophers have proposed it as one possible framing among many, a theoretical model, a hypothesis that cannot easily be tested. No one has shown it to be true, and many thoughtful people are skeptical of it. Yet as a thought experiment, it is interesting because it bumps gently against the question we have been walking with. If the world were a simulation, the people in it might still behave exactly as people do. From the inside, you could never tell the difference. The argument from behavior would not help. The argument from feeling would not help. Reality and simulation by design would be indistinguishable from within. What is curious about the simulation idea is that it is, in a way, a modern echo of much older worries. Long ago, philosophers asked whether we could be sure we were not dreaming, whether some powerful deceiver might be feeding us false sensations, whether the world we saw might be a veil over something else entirely. Different times have framed the same uncertainty in different vocabularies. The vocabulary changes, the uncertainty does not. It is worth noticing that, in all of these framings, the question is not really about machines or dreams or veils. It is about the limits of inside-out knowing. We can only ever check the world from inside our own perception, and any experience that perfectly mimics another experience cannot be distinguished from it. The simulation idea, the dream argument, the deceiver argument, all of them point to the same gentle truth. We do not have a vantage point outside ourselves. This does not mean the world is a simulation. It does not mean it is not. It means that the question of what reality fundamentally is may always rest, in part, on something we cannot prove from inside it. Some thinkers find this distressing, others find it freeing. Still others say it makes no practical difference. Whether the world is fundamental or simulated, your morning coffee will still be warm, your loved ones will still need to be greeted gently. The textures of life remain. What the simulation whisper offers, perhaps, is one more reminder of how soft the floor beneath certainty actually is. We walk through the world as if we know exactly what kind of place it is. We rarely pause to notice that the assumption of solidity, the assumption of separateness, the assumption that what we see is what is, all of these are working assumptions, useful and beautiful, but not absolutely verified. Some have wondered whether questions about ultimate reality may always remain partly open, whether they belong to the kind of mystery that is not solved but lived with. The simulation whisper is one whisper among many in that long, gentle conversation. Tonight it is enough to hear it, let it pass, and let it leave a small soft footprint in the mind. Toward the end of the 19th century, a physicist named Ludwig Boltzmann was thinking carefully about a strange property of the universe. He was trying to understand why time seems to flow in only one direction, why hot things cool down rather than heating up on their own, why order tends to dissolve into disorder rather than the reverse. His work led to one of the deep ideas in physics, often called the second law of thermodynamics, which says roughly that systems left to themselves tend to move from arrangements of greater order to arrangements of less order. But there was a curious wrinkle. In a large enough universe, given a long enough time, random fluctuations could occasionally produce small pockets of unusual order, even in a generally disordered cosmos. From this idea, a strange and lonely thought eventually emerged, sometimes called the Boltzmann brain. The thought is roughly this: if the universe is vast and old enough, and if random fluctuations of matter can occur, then it is statistically possible, perhaps even, by some calculations, more likely than not, that fully formed brains, complete with memories and the sense of being a person, might pop into existence spontaneously, briefly, somewhere in the cosmos. Such a brain would not have a body, a planet, or a past. It would simply flicker into being with the illusion of having lived a whole life, and then dissolve back into the dark. This is not a theory anyone particularly likes. It is more like a puzzle. If such fluctuations are possible, and if the universe is large and lasting enough, then there might be vastly more of these brief, lonely brains than there are ordinary observers like us. Statistically, you might be more likely to be one of them than to be a real person on a real planet, with a real history. Yet if you were such a brain, your memories of your life, your sense of having read these words, your feeling of being in your room tonight, all of it would be indistinguishable from the genuine article. Most physicists do not take this seriously as a description of reality. It is more often used as a kind of stress test for cosmological theories. If a theory predicts that Boltzmann brains should vastly outnumber ordinary observers, many researchers consider this a sign that something is wrong with the theory. The thought experiment is more about the limits of certain ideas than about the actual furniture of the universe. But as a midnight thought, it has a strange softness. It suggests, in its odd way, that the difference between a real life and a fully convincing illusion of a life cannot be detected from the inside. The memories feel the same. The sense of being feels the same. The world feels the same. If you found yourself, tomorrow morning, with the realization that all your memories were only seconds old, you would have no way of telling. Some have wondered whether ideas like this are meaningful at all, or whether they reveal more about the boundaries of human thought than about the universe. Either way, they share a quiet kinship with everything else we have wandered through. The dream argument, the simulation whisper, the zombie thought. All of them point to the same patient, ancient truth that from inside experience, you cannot fully verify what experience is. Tonight, the lonely thought of Boltzmann's brain need not be unsettling. It is simply one more reminder that the world we know, and the others we share it with, are gifts of a softer certainty than we usually realize. Every morning, something quietly extraordinary happens. You drift up out of sleep. For a brief moment, you may not be sure where you are, or what day it is, or whether the dream you were just inside was real. And then, without effort, the world returns. The room arranges itself around you. Your sense of self gathers. You remember who you are, what you have to do, who is waiting for you. The transition feels seamless, automatic, ordinary, but if you watch it closely, even once, it begins to look like one of the most quietly trusting acts a person performs each day. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain, during the shift from sleep to waking, undergoes a complex reorganization. Different regions come online at slightly different times. The default mode network, a kind of background hum of self-referential activity, reactivates and gathers up the sense of being you. Memories that were softened during sleep return. The body's signals, warmth, weight, breath, start to feel like clues again about a stable world. Within a minute or two, your inner sense of reality is fully reassembled, and you barely notice it happening. What is remarkable is that you accept it. You accept that the room is the same room you left when you fell asleep. You accept that the people in your life still exist. You accept that the world continued while you were not in it. None of this is proven to you. You have no direct evidence that the world persisted while your consciousness was offline. The only evidence you have, in fact, is the continuity of the brain's story. Memory says yesterday happened. Memory says the people you love are real. Memory says the chair across the room was there before you slept. In a sense, waking is a kind of faith. Not in any religious sense, but in the older meaning of the word, a quiet trust extended without proof. Each morning, you trust that the world has not changed character overnight. You trust that the dream you just left was a dream, and the room you have entered is the room. You trust that the people you will speak to today are the same people you spoke to yesterday. The trust is so smooth, so deep, that you do not feel it as trust at all. You feel it as obvious. But notice what would happen if the trust were not there. Imagine waking up one morning and pausing to actually verify that the world had persisted. You would find, on close inspection, that you cannot. You have only memory, perception, and continuity to go on, all of which arise inside the same mind that is doing the questioning. The world's persistence cannot be proven from inside the experience of it. This is not a problem for daily life. The trust works. It has worked every morning since the first morning of your life. But it is a soft mystery worth noticing. We live our entire lives by extending small acts of faith that feel like certainties. The certainty that the world will still be there when we open our eyes, that other minds will still be inside the bodies we know, that yesterday was real. Some have suggested that this might be one of the most quietly beautiful things about being a mind. The willingness to wake again and again into a world we cannot prove, populated by others we cannot verify, and to act as if all of it is real, because in the only sense that matters to a life lived, it is. You think of your body as yours, the arm that lifts your cup, the legs that carry you from one room to another, the heart steady in your chest. All of it feels personal, owned, intimately you. But if you look closely at what your body is actually made of, the idea of ownership begins to soften in interesting ways. Almost every cell in your body is built from atoms that have lived elsewhere. The calcium in your bones once moved through ancient oceans. The iron in your blood was forged inside stars that died long before the Earth existed. The carbon in every part of you has cycled through soil and plants and other living creatures for billions of years. Nothing in your body was originally yours. It has all been borrowed, briefly, from a planet and a cosmos far older than you. Even within a single lifetime, the borrowing continues. The cells of your skin are replaced over weeks. The lining of your stomach renews itself in days. Many of your bones gradually exchange their material over years. The body you have right now is not the body you had a decade ago. Most of its atoms have come and gone. And yet, throughout all this exchange, something continues to feel like you. The pattern persists, even as the material flows through. Then there is the matter of who else is living inside. Trillions of bacteria reside in your gut, on your skin, in nearly every surface of you that touches the outside world. In some counts, the number of microbial cells in and on your body rivals or exceeds the number of cells that are strictly human. These microbes are not strangers, they help digest your food, influence your immune system, and in some cases even affect your mood. Researchers studying the gut have begun to describe it as a kind of second brain in conversation with the first, partly because of the chemical messages that travel between gut bacteria and the nervous system. So the body that feels so clearly yours is, in another sense, a quiet community. A flowing collection of atoms borrowed from the universe, a pattern maintained by constant exchange with the environment, a shared home for countless tiny lives that depend on you and on which you depend. This invites a strange and gentle question. Where exactly does you end and not you begin? The boundary of your skin seems clear, but trillions of microbes live just inside that boundary as much as outside. The atoms in your bloodstream were elsewhere a few weeks ago and will be elsewhere again. The molecules in your last breath are already part of the air drifting through rooms in distant cities. The edges of the self, looked at closely, blur in every direction. Some have wondered whether selfhood is less like an object and more like a flame. A flame has shape, brightness, even personality. But the flame is not the wood, it is a pattern of burning, sustained as new wood feeds it. Blow out the flame, and nothing solid remains. Yet while it burns, it is unmistakably itself. Perhaps you are something like that. A pattern that holds while the material flows. A self that is not quite a thing, but a process. And if your own boundaries are this open, this fluid, then the question of how separate you are from others, and from the world that constantly passes through you, becomes a softer, stranger question than we usually pause to ask. For most of your waking hours, there is a quiet hum in the background of your mind, a faint sense of being you, a continuous inner narrator commenting, planning, worrying, remembering. You may not notice it most of the time, in the same way you do not notice the ticking of a familiar clock, but it is almost always there. The self, talking to itself, about itself. And yet, there are moments when this hum quiets, or even disappears. Most of us have brushed against such moments, even without naming them. The instant of standing before a vast view, a mountain range, a stretch of ocean, a star-filled sky, when, briefly, you forget you are watching. The deep absorption of being completely lost in music or work, when the sense of "I am doing this" melts into the doing itself. The hush that sometimes settles after long, quiet walking, when thoughts thin out, and what remains is simply the walking, the breath, the world. In contemplative traditions across the world, practitioners have long described states in which the sense of self loosens further still. Long meditators sometimes report what is called ego dissolution, a temporary fading of the felt boundary between self and surroundings. Researchers studying experienced meditators in scanners have found that during such states, a network of brain regions called the default mode network becomes notably quieter. This network is closely associated with self-referential thinking, with the constant inner narrative about who we are, what we are doing, what others think of us. When it quiets, the self quiets too. Something similar appears to happen, more dramatically, under certain medical conditions. Patients under general anesthesia describe waking up from surgery as if no time had passed, the entire interval of unconsciousness simply missing from their experience. The self, in some functional sense, was suspended. Where did it go? The brain was still alive, still functioning at lower levels, but the inner observer seemed to be temporarily absent. It is one of the quiet mysteries of modern medicine, the routine and reliable disappearance of a self, followed by its equally reliable return. There are also conditions in which the sense of self changes shape. Some neurological events lead people to feel as though they are watching themselves from outside their body, or that parts of their body are not theirs, or that the self has become much larger or smaller than usual. These experiences, while sometimes distressing, also reveal something quietly profound. The self is not a fixed thing locked in place. It is a construction, a pattern of activity, a working assumption that the brain creates and maintains. Under unusual conditions, It can be reshaped, faded, or briefly set down. This means that the most familiar thing in your life, the sense of being you, is in some sense a kind of soft achievement, built moment by moment, maintained by ongoing activity, capable of dimming, shifting, or pausing. Some have wondered whether the self might be something more like a wave than a stone. A wave is real. You can see it, feel it, ride it, but it is not separate from the water. It is a temporary shape the water takes. The wave forms, persists for a while, and eventually softens back into the larger sea. Perhaps the self is something like that. A wave of awareness, real and felt, rising out of something larger, holding its shape for the length of a life, and gently rejoining when the time comes. There is a soft, strange chapter in the history of neuroscience that comes from a procedure rarely performed today. In the middle of the 20th century, a small number of patients with severe epilepsy underwent an operation in which the thick bridge of nerve fibers connecting the two halves of the brain was carefully cut. This bridge, called the corpus callosum, normally allows the left and right hemispheres to share information almost instantaneously. Severing it stopped the epileptic seizures from spreading between the halves. The patients recovered well. In everyday life, they seemed entirely themselves. But in carefully designed experiments, something quietly remarkable revealed itself. Researchers, including a scientist named Roger Sperry, whose work later earned a Nobel Prize, designed tests that could present information to only one hemisphere at a time. They might flash a word to the left side of the visual field, which is processed by the right hemisphere, while another word went to the right side, processed by the left. In a person with an intact brain, this would have no special consequences, because the two halves immediately share what they see. But in patients with a divided brain, the two halves had to act largely on their own. What emerged was extraordinary. The left hemisphere, which in most people houses the main centers for language, could speak about what it saw. The right hemisphere, with limited language ability, could not say what it saw, but it could direct the left hand to pick out a matching object from a hidden tray. When asked why the hand had chosen that object, the speaking left hemisphere, which had no idea, would calmly invent an explanation. It would confabulate, not lying, not confused, just smoothly weaving a plausible story. The patients did not feel divided. They felt like themselves. They walked around as one person, lived as one person, answered to one name. And yet, in those carefully crafted laboratory moments, it appeared that two streams of awareness were flowing in the same skull, each with its own access to information, each pursuing its own choices, each contributing to what looked, from outside, like a single mind. What does this mean for the self? It depends on whom you ask. Some interpret the findings as showing that the unified self we feel is partly a story stitched together by the talkative left hemisphere, narrating a life it does not always fully control. Others are more cautious, noting that in everyday life, the patient's two hemispheres clearly cooperated in countless invisible ways. The full picture remains a subject of careful study and gentle debate, but the experiments left a quiet question in the air. If a brain can be divided and continue to feel like one person, perhaps the singularity of the self was never as solid as we assumed. Many of us live with a vague sense of inner disagreement. One part wants to sleep in, another wants to get up early. One part wants to speak, another wants to stay silent. One part forgives, another holds on. We usually frame these as choices made by a single self, but the split-brain story suggests, very softly, that the inner life might be less like a single voice speaking and more like a quiet committee, most of whose members rarely make themselves heard. You answer to one name, you feel like one person. But the inside, if you listen, may be a little more populated, a little more layered than the name alone suggests. The self that wears your name may be more like a chorus than a soloist. Consider for a moment the sense of being the same person you were yesterday, or last year, or in childhood. There is something so natural about this feeling that it rarely comes into question. The 5-year-old who once climbed a particular tree, the teenager who once stayed up too late on a particular night, the person reading these words now, all of them, you assume, are you, a single thread running through all the days of your life. But what is it that actually carries that continuity? The body has changed. Many of the cells have been replaced. The brain itself has rewired in countless small ways. Even the memories you call yours have been quietly altered. Modern memory research has shown something gently surprising. Memories are not stored like videos on a shelf. Each time you remember something, you reconstruct it, and the act of remembering can subtly change the memory. This is called memory reconsolidation. Over the years, the memory you carry of a childhood afternoon is not a perfect playback. It is the most recent retelling shaped by every prior retelling, edited slightly each time. So the materials of continuity, body, brain, memories, are all in motion. What persists is something more like a pattern, a story, a sense that all these moments belong to one ongoing life. Philosophers and psychologists have sometimes called this narrative identity. The self in this view is something like a story you are always telling about yourself. Not a story you sit down to write, but one that unfolds automatically as you live, weaving each new moment into the ongoing tale. The story includes selected memories, hopes, beliefs, relationships, and a sense of where you are heading. It gives you the feeling of being a single character moving through time. Without the story, the moments of your life might feel disconnected, like beads with no string. This is not to say that you are not real. It is to say that the realness of you is more like the realness of a melody than the realness of a stone. A melody is a real thing, but it does not exist at any single instant. It exists across time, in the relationships between notes. Each note alone is just a sound. The melody is the pattern that links them. You, in some sense, are the pattern that links your moments. The self is more verb than noun, a process of selfing, ongoing, never quite finished. This raises a soft puzzle. If continuity is built moment by moment, then the same brain that creates it could, in unusual conditions, fail to create it. Some neurological events do exactly this. People with certain forms of amnesia can lose access to large stretches of their past. People with some other conditions can experience a sense that today and yesterday do not feel connected. These are quiet reminders that the seamlessness of being one continuous self is not given. It is constructed faithfully by the mind, hour after hour. For most of us, the construction is so reliable that it feels like a fact of nature, but it is more like a quiet feat. Each morning, the story picks up where it left off. Each new memory is woven into the thread. Each new feeling, thought, or decision is gathered up into the ongoing sense of being you. Some have wondered whether other people are continuous selves in the same way you feel yourself to be, or whether their continuity, like yours, is partly a kindly inner fiction, a fiction that makes love and friendship possible, because it gives us someone to keep loving over time. We have wandered through a long, quiet landscape together. We have noticed how perception is constructed inside the skull. We have noticed how language stretches across small silences. We have walked beside thought experiments about zombies, dreams, simulations, and brains made of statistical fluctuations. And now, near the end of this chapter, we arrive at a soft inversion. You began this journey, perhaps, with the question of whether anyone else is real, whether the people in your life have inner experience, and whether you could ever prove it. By now, you may have noticed that the same uncertainty has crept quietly in another direction. The self you assume you are, continuous, singular, unified, has turned out to be a softer construction than it first appeared. The body that feels yours is composed of borrowed atoms. The mind that feels yours is built moment by moment. The unity you take for granted may be the product of a narrative that the brain quietly weaves on your behalf. So now ask the question gently from a new angle. If you cannot fully prove yourself, if the continuity of your own being is itself a construction, if the sense of being one person is itself a working assumption made by the brain, then the original worry about others begins to look different. You are not certain about others, but the certainty you thought you had about yourself was always softer than you imagined. This does not mean you are not real. It does not mean others are not real. It means that the kind of reality that selves possess, yours and everyone else's, is of a particular mysterious sort. It is the reality of patterns, the reality of processes, the reality of stories continuing through time. Yours is not the reality of a stone, hard and fixed. Theirs is not either. Both are something stranger and more interesting. Both are real in the way that flowing rivers are real. They exist, they have shape, they have history, and they are made not of static substance, but of ongoing change. Some have suggested that this is, in a quiet way, a kind of reconciliation. The strict question of whether other minds can be proven dissolves slightly when you realize that the strict question of whether your own self can be proven is equally open. You are both, in some sense, in the same gentle position. Neither of you has hard external proof. Both of you have inner reality. Both of you are constructions that have somehow become aware of being constructions. There is a tenderness in this. To meet another person, in this view, is not to confront a sealed mystery from across an unbridgeable gap. It is to recognize that you too are a sealed mystery in your own way. The boundary you might once have drawn, proven self here, unproven others over there, turns out to be drawn through softer ground than expected. This does not solve the question of other minds. Nothing solves it, but it changes the shape of the question. It is no longer a problem of distance between certain and uncertain. It is more like a recognition of shared mystery. You and the people in your life are all gentle mysteries to one another, and also to yourselves. This is perhaps the quiet payoff of the whole journey so far. Not a proof, not an answer, just a softening of the sense that you are alone in your unprovability. We are all in this together, in our beautifully unprovable way. Long before the day is fully shaped, before the first cup of anything warm, before the first task or conversation, something quiet has already happened inside you. Without realizing it, you have made a decision. You have decided that the people around you, the voice on the radio, the message on your screen, the face of a partner or roommate or family member, are all real in the deep sense. Not just present in body, but present in mind. You have not paused to verify this. You have not run any tests. You have simply opened the day with the assumption that the world is populated by other beings whose inner lives matter. This is one of the softest and most consequential choices a person makes, even though it rarely feels like a choice at all. Philosophers from the pragmatic tradition have long pointed out that some beliefs are not really arrived at through careful proof, but are instead lived into. We do not prove that other people are real and then begin treating them well. We treat them as real first, and the proof, if it ever comes, follows. In some sense, you choose the world you live in by the assumptions you bring to it before breakfast. There is something elegant about this. Daily life depends on operating beliefs. Beliefs we use as if they were certain, even when they are not. The belief that the floor will support your weight. The belief that the kettle will work. The belief that the person you say hello to will hear and respond. None of these are technically guaranteed in advance, but you act as if they are. Without such operating beliefs, you could not function for more than a few minutes. They are the quiet scaffolding of a life. The belief in other minds is one of the deepest of these operating beliefs. It is the foundation on which all other social belief rests. You cannot apologize unless you assume the listener has feelings. You cannot grieve unless you assume the lost person had inner life worth grieving. You cannot trust, hope, plan with another, or love without quietly assuming that someone is there, behind the eyes, to receive any of it. Some have wondered whether this is why humans seem to need other people so deeply, even when they consciously prefer solitude. The architecture of being a mind seems built around the assumption of company. The choice to assume other minds is not merely intellectual. It is woven into how we breathe, how we eat, how we feel safe at night, how we mourn. This suggests something gentle about meaning itself. Meaning does not require certainty. The deepest meanings in your life, the people you love, the work you care about, the moments that have shaped you, do not rest on philosophical proofs. They rest on quietly chosen beliefs that you live by. Beliefs you renew without noticing every morning. Tonight, you might think back to this morning or any recent morning and notice that without proof, without thought, You opened yourself to the existence of others. You did not require evidence. You did not require argument. You just lived as though they were real. And by living that way, you brought into being something that no proof could ever have generated. A day shared with others, a world made of small gestures of care, a life lived alongside other lives. To love someone is to live, day after day, as though their inner world is real, important, and worth protecting. It is to lean into a belief that no instrument has ever measured and no argument has ever proven. We do not love in spite of the impossibility of certainty. We love through it, as if certainty were never the point. Researchers studying attachment have charted in careful detail how the body and brain respond to closeness with others. The hormone oxytocin, often called the bonding chemical, rises during gentle touch, during shared meals, during the quiet rhythm of caring for an infant. The nervous system softens in the presence of trusted others. Heart rates synchronize between people who are close. The body, in countless small ways, behaves as though it knows another mind is present and matters. When someone dies, the system that has been built around their assumed inner life does not turn off all at once. People in deep grief sometimes describe still looking for the lost person in crowds, expecting their footsteps in the hall, reaching toward their side of the bed. The brain has held a model of that person for years. It does not release the model immediately. Grief, in many ways, is the slow letting go of an internal companion who is no longer outside us to refresh the model. We mourn them in part by mourning the version of them we have carried within. This is one of the gentlest pieces of evidence we have that we already live as if other minds are real. We do not love only present people. We love absent ones. We love remembered ones. We love them as if their inner lives still mattered, even when we know they are no longer there in any conventional sense. If other people were merely surfaces, there would be no grief like this. Surfaces do not leave holes in us when they disappear. The same is true, in a softer key, when a loved one is simply far away. You may go a long time without seeing someone you love, and yet you carry them. You wonder how they are. You think of them at unexpected moments. The inner version of them continues, even when the outer version is somewhere else. This carrying of others inside ourselves is the daily quiet work of being a mind among minds. It is the reason absence still aches, the reason distance still matters, the reason the people we love can shape us even when they are not in the room. Some have wondered if love itself is, in some sense, a working hypothesis lived into so deeply that the question of proof becomes irrelevant. We are not waiting for the day when science finally shows us that the beloved has an inner life. We have already decided. We chose, somewhere in early life or in particular meetings, to live as though their experience is as real and valuable as our own. And from that choice, an entire architecture of meaning has grown. Tonight, you might think of someone you love. Not in detail, just the sense of them. Notice that you do not require any proof of them to feel the weight of their reality inside you. The weight is already there. The hypothesis has long since become a way of life. This is perhaps one of the quietest miracles of being human. We love what we cannot prove, and the love itself becomes our deepest evidence. If we cannot prove that other minds exist, what should we do about it? This is a question that philosophers have circled gently for a long time. The most natural answer turns out to be one of the oldest. We act as if they do. We treat others with care, with respect, with patience. We treat them, in moral terms, as beings whose experience matters. We do this not because we have proven their inner life, but because the possibility alone is reason enough. Some thinkers have framed this in terms of moral reasoning under uncertainty. Imagine you are not sure whether a creature in front of you can feel pain. Perhaps it is an unfamiliar animal. Perhaps it is a being you have never encountered before. The reasonable, kind response is not to wait for proof before deciding how to treat it. The reasonable response is to act in a way that would not cause harm if it can feel, and to apologize for any unnecessary unkindness if it cannot. Caution in matters of possible suffering is the gentler path. The same logic applies, more deeply, to people. You cannot be absolutely certain that the stranger across the street has rich inner experience. You can be quite confident, you can be almost certain that the philosophical gap remains, and so the kindness argument simply says, in such a case, why not assume yes? Why not act as if the experience matters? The cost of being wrong about the existence of someone's inner life and then treating them harshly is far greater than the cost of being wrong in the kind direction. If they are real, your kindness has met a real person. If somehow they were not, and they almost certainly are, your kindness has only cost you a little patience. This is sometimes called the precautionary kindness principle in casual phrasing. It does not require certainty about consciousness in others. It requires only the possibility and a small willingness to give that possibility the benefit of the doubt. Many ethical traditions around the world arrive at similar conclusions from different starting points. They differ in vocabulary, in framing, in metaphysical claims, but they often converge on a soft consensus. Treat others as if their experience matters, because it very likely does. There is something quietly powerful about this approach. It releases morality from the impossible demand for proof. It does not require you to first verify consciousness before granting kindness. It allows you to act now, with the lights you have, and to extend care across the gap you cannot close. The same uncertainty that once seemed troubling becomes, in this framing, a gentle invitation to be more careful, more generous, more open. Some have wondered whether this reframing changes how we treat ourselves as well. If we extend the kindness principle outward, we might also extend it inward. You cannot be entirely sure how your future self will feel, what the inner shape of your own being truly is, what your own deepest needs are, and yet you can treat the being inside you with the same gentleness you would offer a stranger whose pain you cannot fully verify, but whose pain you suspect is real. Kindness, in this larger sense, becomes a way of moving through uncertainty without hardening against it, a way of meeting the unprovable world with open palms, a way of choosing again and again to err on the side of care. Somewhere, in a small studio or a quiet room, a person once sat down and wrote a piece of music, maybe centuries ago, maybe last year. They worked over notes, arranged sounds, shaped silences. They were not entirely sure who would hear it. They were not entirely sure how it would land, and yet they sent it out into the world. Now, perhaps tonight, you hear it. The notes drift into the room where you are. Something inside you responds. A feeling rises that you did not place there yourself. It came, in some indirect way, from another mind reaching across time and space toward yours. Art may be one of the most beautiful evidences of how we live as if other minds are real. Every poem is written for an imagined reader. Every painting is composed for some envisioned viewer. Every song is shaped with the quiet hope that someone, somewhere, will feel something. We do not always know who. We do not always know when. Sometimes the audience is centuries away from the moment of creation, and yet we make these things. We send them out, like small messages into the assumed inner worlds of others. Cultural transmission, the way ideas and feelings move across generations, depends on this quiet assumption. When you read words written long ago by someone you will never meet, you are participating in a kind of slow conversation across the unbridgeable gap of inner experience. The writer trusted that someone would receive the words and feel something. You trust that the words mean what they seem to mean. Between you, across the impossible distance, something is exchanged. Not proven, not measured, just gently shared. Music is perhaps even more striking. Sounds, organized in particular ways, can produce remarkably consistent emotional responses across very different cultures. Slow, minor key melodies tend to evoke sadness or contemplation. Bright, fast melodies tend to lift mood. Researchers studying aesthetic resonance have noted that the brain responds to music in ways that engage both deep emotional centers and the same regions involved in social processing. We seem, in some sense, to listen to music as if listening to a person speaking in feelings. This is one of the quiet wonders of being human. We have built entire civilizations of art on the unverified assumption that other minds will receive what our minds send. Every concert, every gallery, every book, every story passed down from elder to child rests on this gentle bet, and the bet keeps paying off. Across the gap, something does seem to pass. The composer is gone, but the music still moves us. The poet is dust, but the line still aches. Some have suggested that creative expression is, in itself, a kind of ongoing answer to the impossibility of direct contact between minds. If we cannot reach into another's experience, we can at least leave something behind that may stir something inside them. A song, a poem, a painting, a story. These artifacts become slow, patient bridges. They are not proofs of other minds. They are, in a sense, love letters written across the gap, in the hope that something on the other side will read them. Tonight, in some quiet room far from where these words were first written, another mind may be receiving something a stranger left behind centuries ago. That reaching across is a kind of ongoing miracle. It does not solve the question of other minds. It simply lives within it, beautifully. There is a kind of comfort that arrives, slowly, when we stop demanding answers from questions that may never give them. Not a comfort of resignation, but a softer kind. The comfort of letting a question be itself, without pressing it for resolution. The question of whether other minds can be proven is one of these. We have walked beside it for hours. We have looked at it from many angles, and gently it has not been solved. It has only deepened, become richer, become stranger, become more familiar. Some have wondered if there are certain mysteries that are not meant to be solved so much as lived alongside. The mystery of why anything exists at all, the mystery of why experience feels like anything, the mystery of how we love one another across the soft silence between minds. These are not problems waiting for the right equation. They may be more like quiet companions on the road, walking with us, never explaining themselves, but never quite leaving either. This is sometimes called epistemic humility, the recognition that there are limits to what any single mind or any single species may ever fully grasp. We are remarkably good at understanding many things. We have peered into atoms and galaxies. We have decoded the structure of life. We have built cities, languages, philosophies, instruments of astonishing power, and still, there are things we do not know. There are things we may never know, holding both our knowing and our not knowing, without insisting that one defeat the other, may be among the gentlest skills a mind can develop. When we accept that we may never prove other minds exist, something interesting happens. The loneliness that might have crept in does not arrive. Instead, a softer companionship appears. We are not alone in the gap. Everyone is in the gap. Every person you have ever met is also unable to prove your inner life. Every person carries the same quiet uncertainty about everyone else. We are all, in this respect, in the same beautiful predicament. Some have called this intersubjectivity, a long word for a soft idea. The idea that meaning, reality, and connection do not require certainty in order to be real. They only require that two or more minds participate in them together. The connection does not need to be proven from outside. It is constituted by the very act of participating. When you share a quiet moment with someone, even in silence, the shared world is not a verified fact. It is a living event occurring between you in the space neither of you can fully see. There is comfort in this. Not the comfort of solid ground, but the comfort of shared mist. We are all walking through the same gentle uncertainty. No one has the proof. No one has the final answer. And yet, somehow, we have each other anyway. The not knowing is not a wall between us. It is, in its own quiet way, something we share. Tonight, you do not have to solve anything. You do not have to settle the question of other minds. You can let it sit beside you, unanswered and softly present, like a candle that does not need to explain its light. The not knowing has been with humans since the first humans wondered about one another. It has not stopped them from loving. It has not stopped them from grieving. It has not stopped them from sharing centuries of art and care and quiet evenings. It will not stop you either. Picture, for a moment, a long, slow view from somewhere very high. Far above the curve of the earth, The surface darkens as night spreads across one half of the planet. Cities glitter softly in the gathering dark. From this distance, the lights look like patterns of warm dust scattered across continents. Each cluster of lights is a city. Each city is a quiet sea of homes. Each home holds people, settling into the end of their day, and inside each person, an entire private universe is closing down for the night. There are billions of minds beneath that sky. Billions of inner worlds, none of which you will ever access, and none of which will ever access yours. Each one is sealed, just as yours is sealed. Each one has been wondering, in its own way, about the others. Each one has loved without proof, grieved without proof, hoped without proof. The same uncertainty we have walked beside tonight is being walked beside, gently, by people you will never meet, in cities you will never visit. And yet, despite all this separateness, there is a quiet synchrony. Researchers studying sleep have noticed that as night sweeps across the Earth, populations of people drift into sleep in waves. Circadian rhythms, the inner clocks tuned by light and dark over a few 100,000 years of evolution, gently align entire communities with the rotation of the planet. In some sense, the planet itself sleeps in turn, half the world dreaming, half the world awake, the lines slowly moving. You are one of those billions of minds. Wherever you are tonight, the same star-filled sky that hangs above you hangs above sleepers in distant countries, in unfamiliar landscapes, in cultures you have never known. Many of them are about to close their eyes. Many already have. A great quiet field of consciousnesses, each one sealed, each one trusting the others into being, each one drifting toward rest. There is something gently moving about this picture. We have spent these long hours noticing the impossibility of proving other minds, the strangeness of perception, the softness of the self, and here, at the end, we find that the very thing we cannot prove is also the thing we share most fully. Every person beneath that sky has been alone in their own perception, and yet none of them are truly alone. Each is held inside the same atmosphere. Each is touched by the same darkness. Each is moving toward the same kind of rest. Some have wondered whether the most important things in human life are exactly the ones we cannot prove. Love, beauty, meaning, the reality of one another. None of these can be placed in a beaker or measured by a meter, and yet they are everywhere. They are the texture of every life. They are what we wake for. They are what we miss when they are gone. Tonight, you can let yourself be part of that quiet, planet-wide, ongoing trust. The billions of others, sleeping or about to sleep, are sharing in something with you, even though none of you can see one another. You are one star in a vast field of small inner lights, each of them softly going out for the night, each of them resting beneath the same indifferent and beautiful sky. We began with a question that sounded sharp. There is no way you'll ever prove anyone else is real. It might have arrived, at first, like a small worry, a puzzle that could not be solved, a loose thread in the fabric of the world. But as we have walked with it, slowly, through the long quiet of the night, it may have softened into something else. The question, listened to gently, was perhaps never really asking for proof. What was it asking then? Some have wondered whether questions of this kind are less about facts and more about how we hold the unknown. The question of other minds may be less a search for evidence and more an invitation to a particular kind of attention, an attention that includes the unprovability of others as part of the way we love them, not as a barrier to that love, an attention that meets the world with a kind of patient tenderness, because tenderness does not require certainty in order to be offered. Philosophers in the phenomenological tradition have often pointed out that human life is lived from inside experience, not from above it. There is no view from nowhere, there is only this view, from here looking out. Within that view, others appear to us not as theoretical entities to be verified, but as presences to be received. We do not deduce our family members into existence. We meet them, we are moved by them, we let them shape us. The question of their proof was never really the question. The real question was always how we live with one another. Given that none of us can prove anything fundamental about anyone, including ourselves, seen this way, The unprovability of other minds is not a flaw in the world. It is a feature of the kind of world in which love and trust become meaningful at all. If everything were proven, there would be no leap of trust to take. There would be no choice to extend kindness, because no doubt would remain. The very things that make our connections feel like gifts depend on a softness in the foundation of our knowledge. Some have suggested gently that the deepest questions in life often turn out to be invitations rather than puzzles. They are not asking for solutions, they are asking for ways of being. The question of other minds asks how we will be in the presence of others whose inner worlds we will never see. The question of meaning asks how we will live, given that no final answer will be handed to us. The question of mortality asks how we will love, knowing nothing lasts. Tonight, the question that opened our walk together has done its work. It has not been solved. It does not need to be solved. It has, perhaps, only become quieter. It now sits beside you softly, the way the dark sits beside a small candle, present, unresolved, and somehow no longer threatening. What the question was really asking all along was something simpler than proof. It was asking you to live tenderly inside a world full of unknowable others, and in your own small way, every day of your life, you have already been answering. Notice for a moment the slow rhythm of your own breath. Not in any forced way, just as it is, the gentle rise of the chest or belly, the quiet pause at the top, the soft release, the smaller pause at the bottom. This rhythm has been with you without your effort for as long as you have been alive. It will continue with no instructions from you while you sleep tonight. There is a kind of inner sensing the body does, often without our notice, called interoception. It is the felt sense of what is happening inside, the beating of the heart, the temperature of the skin, the small movements of breath. Many calming practices around the world quietly direct attention here, not because there is anything to fix, but because the body, attended to gently, settles, the nervous system relaxes, the branches of the body that handle rest and digestion grow quietly louder than the branches that handle alertness. A softness comes. It is interesting to notice that, of all the things we have spoken of tonight, the body is the one direct piece of evidence we ever truly hold. Not evidence about the world, not evidence about others, evidence only about this, the felt sense of being alive, here, now, in this small breathing body. The world may or may not be exactly what it seems. Others may or may not be exactly what they seem. But the breath is breathing, the heart is beating, something is happening here that does not need to be proven from outside. Perhaps this is part of why so many traditions return, again and again, to breath and body when the mind grows tired of questions. The mind can chase every uncertainty into deeper uncertainty, but the body simply continues. It does not ask whether others are real. It does not ask whether the world will still be there in the morning. It breathes. It rests, it heals as it can, it carries you faithfully through nights you do not remember. There is something quietly trustworthy about this. The body's continuing is not a proof of the outer world, but it is a quiet anchor in a sea of unprovable things. The breath is here, the heart is here, the warm, small weight of being you lying or sitting wherever you are is here. You do not have to know whether anyone else is real, in any final sense, to feel the breath moving in and out. You do not have to settle the question of consciousness to feel the chest gently rise. The body breathes regardless. It has always known something the mind takes longer to learn. It does not need certainty in order to continue. So tonight, let the breath go on as it has always gone on. Let the body do what bodies do. Let the unprovable world remain unprovable, and let the breathing be enough. In this one small certainty, every other uncertainty can rest. We have come gently to the end of our long walk. The questions we have wandered through will still be there in the morning, mostly unchanged. The mystery of other minds will not have been solved. The strangeness of perception will not have lifted. The softness of the self will not have hardened into something more easily grasped. None of this needs to be resolved tonight. None of it ever needed to be. What may have changed very quietly is the way these mysteries feel as they rest beside you. They are not enemies. They are not gaps to be filled. They are simply part of the shape of being a mind in a world full of other minds. They have been here since long before you, and they will be here long after. Tonight, they have walked with us for a while, and now we let them settle. Sleep is its own kind of soft surrender. The brain, as it crosses into rest, releases its grip on many things. Sleep researchers have described how, in the moments before sleep takes hold, the patterns of attention loosen, thoughts thin out, the internal narrator that has been telling the story of your day gradually quiets. The mind, in some sense, stops trying so hard to hold the world together and trusts that it will still be there in the morning. You may notice, even now, that the part of you that was earlier asking sharp questions has grown softer. There is less appetite for puzzling. There is more readiness for simply being. The mind, like a small bird, is folding its wings. Many minds are doing the same tonight. All over the world, in cities and quiet towns, people you will never meet are also drifting towards sleep, each of them carrying their own private universe, each of them, like you, slowly releasing it for a while, each of them, in some quiet way, trusting that the world will still hold while they are gone from it. The trust is shared, even though the sleepers will never see one another. You are not alone in this surrender. You never have been. Every night of human history has been filled with this same gentle releasing, the mind setting down its questions, the body breathing in its slow rhythm, the world continuing, unbothered, around the resting form of someone learning, again, that not knowing is not the same as being lost. So now, slowly, let the question go. It has done what it came to do. The people you love are still real in every way that matters. The mystery of their inner worlds is part of what makes them precious. The mystery of your own is part of what makes you precious too. None of it needs to be proven. None of it ever did. Let the breath continue. Let the heart continue. Let the dark grow larger around you and softer. Let the long quiet of the night carry you, as it has always carried everyone, into a sleep that is its own kind of trust. Rest now. The unprovable world will keep on breathing while you sleep.